have the time to listen to me grind. Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once. I am one of those skeptical.
Hello, welcome back to The Grind. Don't care what your grind is, just happy if you make me part of it. I primarily look at players through metrics or analytics perspective, but it's all a grind, man, and we're just here to enjoy it, alright? I just got done doing my initial rankings of wide receivers. I've got to do running back, tight end, quarterback, and then get to making a rookie draft board at some point. So it's time to dig into running back, which means the first question is what matters? What matters when evaluating rookie running backs? What stats have correlation to fantasy points? And what do we need to know? First thing is that points per game over the first 3 years is actually much more accurate for running backs than anyone else. Like Zach Reed was just asking, Zach Reed from the Dynasty Dummies podcast, he was asking on Twitter, when do you give up or go in, or how long do you wait on players? Running backs, well, you know, Devontae Parker breaking out in year 4 for a first-year round wide receiver, for example, is highly unusual. Running backs like Derrick Henry having their best year in their 4th year, that's even more unusual. Really, you've got a much narrower window, which means the points per game over the first 3 years is actually even more accurate ranking players that you want in the draft. And so that's important to note. The second thing is that production tends to be much less effective at predicting running backs. So it's not to say it's not important and there aren't stats that we shouldn't pay attention to. It's just I'm willing to squint at them a little harder. Let's put it that way. Specifically, the average or age adjusting doesn't seem to do a lot for running back. I haven't given up on it entirely, but mostly you're looking at the best seasons and the average, but you take into account the best season. Now, an example of this last year was Miles Sanders, so everyone's probably already pretty well aware of this, that if a player has been playing behind another running backs, it works a little differently than wide receiver, man. It's a different position. You can get held back behind another player that the team is using right then. And running back usage, as we know from the NFL, is a lot more coaching and team dependent. They can decide to use running back more, whereas wide receivers are more able to earn targets and earn opportunity over each other, even when they're rookies, even when they're freshmen or sophomores or whatever else. Running backs, paralleling the NFL onto college, we should expect that running backs can't earn opportunity for someone else on the depth chart, and that's why we also take the best season into account a bit more than I do, at least for wide receiver. So I'm going to skip over to my model now. Please don't go to sleep. It is a spreadsheet, but we're going to talk about which parts of it matter at all, and I've condensed it. There's a lot in there, but I'm condensing it to smaller sections. Actually, there's way too much going on this screen. Let's see if I've got another one. There we go. Less of me, more of running backs, right? So we're currently looking at just everyone right now. I wanted to show you a quick cheat that I use that you can't use in Excel. You don't have to do it if you don't want to write formulas, but they're good numbers to note. So what I've got here on the first line, these are the average scores on all the statistics below them. For running backs who have at least one top 12 season. And below that, with the color coding little stuff here, that's the RSQ, that's the R squared to fantasy points per game for each individual metric, just mapped onto each other. Now, I haven't cleaned up the sample. This has got everyone in it, so the R squared changes a lot. The more accurately you select your sample. So just keep that in mind. These aren't the R squared numbers, but it's just a rough guide, like which is more important. Just if we were to count everyone, including rookies who have no points per game, and so that's affecting it as well, probably a little bit. So it's just a rough eye guide that I use a lot when I'm looking, especially over prospects like running backs, just to get an idea of where kind of the average of good is, right? That would be the first line, and how important it is the second line. Just as a quick cheat code. So if we get rid of that, and just to point out here that Travis Etienne and Chuba Hubbard, who both went back to the school instead of coming into this draft, they both look pretty decent. But, you know, let's not worry about what we can't worry about right now. So I pointed the fault, if there is a fault, on Jonathan Taylor's rookie profile out a few while ago, and everyone took that to mean that I hate him. But look, these are ranked by my what do I call it? The pre-draft model. My pre-draft model is doing actually pretty well. I recently rewrote it to be a lot more descriptive than attempting to be predictive, because I wanted to describe how like successful players these guys are. For reference, if we go look at, where would it be? Draft Capital, for example. Nope. Where have I hidden that? Yeah, Draft Capital by itself, or Draft Round, has a 32% correlation to fantasy success or average points per game. Draft Capital is even more important for running back than most positions. God bless the undrafted free agents always, and Philip Lindsay and Austin Eckler, but essentially Draft Capital matters even more for running back, so it's worth keeping that in mind. And also, it's a good number to know. Within this test, there's the exact same calculation I'm running here. 32% is Draft Capital, and my pre-draft model is hitting 27, which isn't bad, but it's not better than Draft Capital. My post-draft model will include Draft Capital, which beats Draft Capital, but it's a good number to know. 32% is really good. Think of Rashad Penny and all the other failures in the first round. That's what 32% looks like, and everything else is below that. So, it's just a good context to know. Anyway, so the new things I've put in here, I guess, that I like to look at is this receiving percentage here. These were, I put them in there purely because I don't know a lot about these players. I don't watch college. I was looking for a description of what type of role they run in the NFL. So what you've basically got here, this is the average, but you can expand it to see their best and last and everything else, like my other my other tabs for wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback. I'm dividing it up that way. You can see what they did at each age if you expand and slide to the right a bit, but anyway, I'm looking at the average here. This is the average percentage of their total yards, or the yards from scrimmage, that they got in the receiving game. It's very descriptive. It's not intended to be predictive. I just want to know how much of their production is coming from their receiving yards and how much is coming from their rushing yards. As you can see up here, running backs with top 12 seasons average about a 15% target share, or a 15% receiving yards share. And if you want to know that in context, you can always just skip over to top 12 running backs, or I'll do it for you. How's that? So here's everyone who's got a top 12 season, at least one, since 2003, when my database goes to, and you can look at what those numbers look like. So you see that Nick Chubb is well below 15% and is obviously really good, and we think he can catch passes too. See that Leonard Fournette even had a 12% share, so that's below 15, but it's actually probably higher than you expected, right? 12% of his yards were actually from the receiving game. And you can see the exceptions if you were to sort by these columns, like Derrick Henry's down at 7%, Melvin Gordon's down at 4%. So especially where it's descriptive, it's not intended to be a death nail for anyone. And again, Jonathan Taylor is 5%. That's more than Melvin Gordon, right? It's less than Leonard Fournette. So we know his role in the receiving game is relatively restricted, and when we break down his career, we see that he had his highest receiving usage in his last season, so that's fine, but even his best season is actually below the average of top 12 running backs. So his role in college was less in the receiving game than we typically like to see. Not a death nail, because everything else on this profile looks perfect, just to put it out there. And depending on landing spot, that could not matter. Melvin Gordon did it, right? But it is what my concern. A.J. Dillon, who's currently coming up second, also has a similar problem. So it's not like my model is adjusting very much or at all for their receiving usage through this particular stat. But it's worth knowing about them, right, when you're breaking down their draft capital and everything else. So I really think this matters, but more as a description of how they compare, their roles in college compare to past prospects. Cam Akers and Swift look a lot more natural compared to top 12 running backs, and both of those guys are players I like a lot. J.K. Dobbins is an interesting guy to come in third here, because his production is great. He's 4% above the average if you look at his whole career, and top 12 running backs average about 2% above the average, so that's definitely positive. Where he didn't, I don't have his 40 time. I went and looked it up, and it doesn't look like he ran the 40. You've got to remember that my combine score and also my pre-draft model, one of the things I've started including is a height-adjusted speed score, because it seems to be relevant a little bit for running backs. So height-adjusted speed score, adjusting their athleticism for their size matters a little bit, but how predictive it is questionable. But it does seem to matter. It has a high probability of mattering. But with, where is he? Dobbins here, where I don't have a 40 time, what it did is it just took the average of his class. That's one to adjust for any changes in the combine. Like this year, everyone was worried that it was late in the day, and that affects your literally, what do they call it? Your sleeping pattern, your sleeping cycle. So, everyone's in this class is doing the combine at the same time. So instead of just taking the average, I took the average of each player's class. And so Dobbins' athleticism score here, his combine score, is a little suspect. Everyone that I've read says J.K. Dobbins is definitely athletic, so we can kind of believe it. But we all believe that about where is he? Clyde Edwards-Helaire as well, who's someone I want to talk about in a minute. And actual testing can prove us wrong. But it's worth knowing that his pre-draft model assumes his 40 time is the average, and that assumes his height-adjusted speed score is maybe more than it is. So that should be known about J.K. Dobbins as well. But his production looks stellar. His production score over his entire college career is 4% above the average. And he has a very decent split between his rushing game and receiving game, and that's important. I also wanted to point out that receiving and rushing yards per attempt, I include the receiving and the rushing in the per team passing attempt. And that's per team attempt, not just passing attempts, so that's rushing attempts as well. Like, I sum it all up when I look at that for running backs. Looking year over year, even though efficiency tends to be difficult to be predictive or sticky or anything else, there is just a visual cue that looking back through past prospects, efficient running backs seem to have a connection to success in the NFL. So efficiency definitely does matter, and as you can see from the R-squared test here, both the best and the average are used in my model, and they have decent predictive power based when you compare it to like combine stats or those descriptive stats of receiving yards percentage that I was talking about. Like it's like half what draft capital is, but it's still useful, right? So these, the efficiency metrics, and you can also look at it if you don't have this or you don't want to go to my database, like yards per touch isn't effective, but it does tell you something. It isn't predictive, but it does tell you something about their efficiency. So I don't hate looking at it that way as well. But, the one I'm using right now is yards per team attempt, because it's actually predictive. So a player that's turned up for the first time, never seen his name before, is Anthony McFarland, and he's one of the test cases for best year matters. You can see his best year, is actually more efficient, actually comes in line with the average for top 12 running backs, but his career as a whole, and his production score tells you this, is actually below average. So this is a guy who hasn't produced sufficiently high enough to look good compared to everyone, but the model's adjusting for best year. And you can also see that in his counting stats. I've only got 2 years of data on him. He's only carried or touched the ball 269 times in college, which is a lot less than all of these players. So that all helps fill in the context. But once you build in his average along with his best, Anthony McFarland's a really interesting running back. He was incredibly athletic. His height-adjusted speed score is helping him out a lot with my pre-draft model here, and we ran a 4.44 at the combine, and at his size, that just really helped him out in my model. So he's a lower guy. I would not value him over any of the guys in this list. Like, I'd have him below Vaughn right now, probably. I haven't done the rankings yet. This is the start of me trying to do it. But Anthony McFarland is definitely an interesting name that's primarily come to me at least, because the combine has adjusted my model's expectation of him. All right, what else is important? Total dominator rating, that takes rushing and receiving. A lot of the stats that do both rushing and receiving tend to have the most signal. Again, it's not as good as total dominator rating in this best or average season. Again, looking at both their best and their average. This one's essentially age adjusted, and again, age just fouls out. Normally, if this was wide receiver, this would have a higher score than their best and average, but it doesn't because it's running back. Again, age seems to have less of a use for running backs as it does wide receivers or even tight ends. All right. What else can I talk about in here? This combine score is interesting, but look, and this is the thing about the combine. While it's relevant, it's incredibly unpredictable. Even the combine score I've created here, which literally took the best players and tried to describe them in terms of their points per game with their combine numbers, that's in this simple test, it's proving unpredictable. Now, I can select a better sample and get a great RSQ number and, impress my nerd friends, but the truth is that their athleticism has to be measured in context. If you're seeing it, if your grind is tape, right, and you're seeing it, like, don't worry so much about what the combine says. If their production is great, don't worry about so much what the combine says. But we should take it into consideration, right? And the same way that the 40 time is the most predictive combine stat in this simple test, but when I break it down, again, its RSQ falls drastically. Its probability does stay relevant, though. So it's important to know how fast they are and how big they are, but predictive value is limited. I would really I would organize them or sort them, rank them differently, and then consider their combine. So that's what matters for their combine as well. Do that as the sort too, right? Not the first primary read, but it is interesting and important information to build in. And weight-adjusted speed score, this is why I use the weight-adjusted one. It just has better predictive power. Weight-adjusted uses both weight and height, interestingly enough. So it's like a corollary for BMI and 40 time. Height-adjusted just uses height. If you're ever wondering about what's in any of the calculations, I spent a lot of time breaking them down so I could do them, and I list them on the Formula and Results tab in the database. So you can go look at the actual calculation and see how it's calculated, if you ever want to know what's involved in it. Adjusting for height and weight and BMI kind of makes sense at running back. But again, you've always got your Philip Lindsay at one end and your Arian Foster at the other to prove that people beat those thresholds all the time. So even at running back, we have to look at athleticism and combine numbers specifically with a little bit of a critical eye. Does it match up to everything else I'm seeing? All right, so those are the stats I'm finding to be the most relevant for running back. Rushing college dominator is, it's okay. That just does the dominator calculation just on their rushing production, so that's taking out their receiving production, and you can see it's falling below. Anything that builds in, like total dominator, builds in the receiving game, tends to have a better predictive value. Again, points per game with PPR scoring in mind, it makes sense that guys who have a bigger role in the receiving game more predictive when looking at stats that include the receiving game as opposed to ones that exclude them. And that says a lot about how productive Jonathan Taylor was in college, frankly. I mean, he's got poor receiving stats. Not poor compared to other players' stats. I'm not saying he is poor, but when you compare his numbers to other good players, they look lower. He's obviously very good. But he's so good at it that it doesn't matter. It's pushing him to the top of my model. His actual pre-draft score rivals Saquon Barkley's, okay? Like, I can't say anything better than that. So I think Jonathan Taylor has to be at the top of my list right now. But I keep looking at Cam Akers, who I think is really solid. Like, this is really solid profile. And you can see he was 8% above the average, too. That's very impressive for his entire career. And also DeAndre Swift, who I think is it's Swift or Taylor at the top, right? And I can really see it with Swift. His 18% target share. He's a hell of a big receiving threat. A natural receiver in college. Definitely playing that role. Cam Akers too, but to a little bit less extent because he's slightly below the average. And Jonathan Taylor just wasn't doing it for the majority of his career, at least. Even in his last or his best season, both the same thing. He didn't have the level of receiving volume as we typically see. But his production's so good, you just got to believe he's going to be good in the NFL, in the right landing spot. maybe he can pull a Melvin Gordon, right? So I really like DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, and Cam Akers. Those are looking like my top three. Dobbins and Dillon in the top 5 as well. I'm not sure which way I'm going to go. And like Jonathan Dobbins' time being affected by this imaginary 40 score kind of affects me. I don't like imaginary numbers too much. So Dillon maybe gets the edge there. Something else I want to note, because people have pointed it out recently, total number of touches. Running backs touch the ball too much. Well, then you should really love Anthony McFarland, frankly. My model does take total yards and total touches into account, because it does seem to have some probability value. But the adjustment it wants to make is really, really tiny for touches. Like, yeah, those 900 touches, maybe that's a lot, but you're going to miss more than you hit if you worry too much about the amount they touch the ball before they get to college. Think of it this way. Jonathan Taylor has, 700 touches more than Anthony McFarland. 1 year into the NFL, escalating the level of violence in the hits that he's going to receive. Anthony McFarland's going to have the same amount of wear on his body as Jonathan Taylor did because of his college hits. And that's not to diminish college hits or anything, but I mean, if we were actually to take it seriously, we'd run a curve on it, and if you want this guy for more than 1 year, right? But I think the wear on their body is going to be fairly similar if they get a large role in their rookie season by the end of their first NFL season. Oh, that's just the way I think of it. So those are numbers that stick out to me. Names that got dinged, like I really like Zach Moss before the combine. His 40 time just hurt him because it does seem to matter. It's built into the model in the height adjusted speed score, and it is probably now worth noting that his best total dominator season was a little below average compared to players in the top 20 with top 12 seasons. Not enough that his production is concerned. His production was really good. We'll have to see what the NFL makes of that 40 time. The other guy that I said I wanted to mention is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I really started to come in on him. He's got a low production score, again, because he's one of these guys that didn't do it for his entire college career, but had one good year, his last year, right? And again, he had his best receiving year in that Clyde's always been pretty much part of the receiving game. Yeah, he's got a 20% receiving yard share. He's always been part of the receiving game. It's really positive, so I was really starting to come in on him. Again, his 40 time really dragged him down based on his height adjusted speed score. If the NFL doesn't care about this, and I've read some things to suggest they've become a lot less sensitive to 4.6 times, then he'll get draft capital, and the post-draft model will move him back up. So I want Clyde, in my top 8, but I need to know what the NFL is going to do with that. All right. Hopefully that's useful to look at some of the stats that my model uses and what I'm looking at while I try to evaluate running backs. Database is free, pinned to the timeline, content is free. Thanks for checking out. If you did, maybe subscribe to the channel, comment down below about how terrible or good stats are, that'd be nice. But thanks again. I will see you here next time on The Grind. It's not The Grind, it's A Grind, all right? I'm just trying to show you my grind so that we can talk about what yours is saying, and then maybe we can just hit at a higher rate in a rookie dress. I think that'd be pretty cool. So thanks for checking it out. I'll see you again next time. Take care.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind? Take down the film watchers and nerds all at once.